Just come back on Saturday. Thank you all. I think it's in your programs. I'm not going through a long introduction, but you know Governor Chris Christie, Governor Nikki Haley, Governor Rick Scott, Scott Walker, Rick Scott, Scott Walker, gets me Sam Brownback, who's been a longtime friend of the Aspen Institute when you were in the Senate and worked even with Madeleine Albright on many humanitarian issues. But so has everybody here. I want to thank you all for coming. And I want to start with Paul Ryan's speech today and the big plan he laid out for not only cutting, as he did in his budget, but saying now it's not about cuts. And he laid out a plan without cuts that said we really have to tackle economic opportunity. And he did it in a way that you've seen Jeb Bush do, Mike Lee, Marco Rubio, Governor Christie. Many have laid out plans that aren't just about cutting taxes, cutting spending, but doing government in a smart way that's a compassionate way of making sure everybody has an equal opportunity in America. So let me start. I'll start with you, Governor Brownback. Tell me about what you feel can be done to promote economic opportunity both in your state and in this country.
Well, first, thanks, and thanks to the Aspen Institute. And thank all you for being out here tonight. It's wonderful, and glad to be able to join you. I think Paul Ryan is trying to really bring back the Jack Kemp pro-growth, happy, let's move forward and grow this nation wing of the party. I'm in that wing of the party. I believe in that. And that's where we ought to be. It's the forward-looking. It's getting your taxes cut, but the real focus here is growth. It's growth for the country and growth for the economy. You can't move this place forward unless you're growing. And to do that, you got to cut taxes in a way that create growth. You really, in a state's case, we've got to go at income taxes. We went to zero taxes on LLCs and sub-S's. That's how small business is organized. We got a record number of new small businesses and record number of people working. That's a smart way to do it. And you got to then also work with your job training area to make sure that people have the skills that match up with the workforce. So we went and we said as a state, we'll pay for 100% of technical education while you're in high school. And we had over a 200% enrollment increase. So you do both so that people can have that opportunity and growth.
Governor Walker, let me get more specific, if I may, about the Ryan and other plans. An earned income tax credit increase for poor working people without children, and reducing incarceration, saying that we shouldn't be putting as many people in jail. What about things like that?
Well, again, those are issues at the federal level. At the state level, we've been doing some of those things. I think a number of us will talk about. We're ahead of the curve. We appreciate that our friend Congressman Paul Ryan, who literally is a friend, he grew up about 15 miles down the road from me, worked for Sam years ago, and is a great optimist, is one of the few people in Washington, either party, I would argue, that is there to do something great, not just be something great, and that's why I admire Paul so much. But we're ahead of the curve. We're doing those sorts of things at the state. We've reduced, for example, all of our income tax rates. In fact, the lowest tax rate is now down to 4%. That puts an incredible amount of money back in the hands of the working poor. But I think in the larger context, even beyond just the specifics of that, I think there's a real contrast. In fact, I wish it's one we had talked about 2 years ago nationally in the presidential election. And there's a contrast, and I think a debate that's worthy of happening in this country between one side. I think the president and his allies in each of our states largely measure success in government, particularly for those in need, by how many people are dependent in the government. How many people are on unemployment compensation, how many people are on food stamps, how many people are on Medicaid. I believe, and I believe most Republicans believe, we should measure success in government by just the opposite, by how many people are no longer dependent in the government. Not because we kicked them out to the cold, but because we empowered people to control their own lives and their own destinies. And a lot of what you'll hear us talk about in more detail today is what Sam just talked about with workforce development, worker training, economic development, I call it, because the more you get people the skill sets needed to fill the jobs that are open today and even more that will be in the future, the more you eliminate the need for any of these programs. Because what most people want, one of the biggest mistakes in that 47% comment is that the vast majority of people, I would argue, not just in my state, but in each of our states here, don't want to be on public assistance. That's not the American dream. That's not a Republican or conservative principle. That's an American principle. Nobody grows up in America saying, someday when I grow up, I want to become dependent in the government. That's not the American dream. At least it wasn't when I grew up. And we're the ones that should be talking about ways to help more people live their piece of the American dream.
Governor Scott.
Well, well, I actually grew up in public housing, and I can tell you that's not the goal of most Floridians. When I walked into this job 3.5 years ago, my state had lost 832,000 jobs in 4 years, and the last governor left me with a $3.5 billion budget deficit. So we balanced the budget, and we started cutting taxes the first year. We've cut taxes 40 times. We have, this last year we cut taxes $500 million. We've cut regulation, but we invested in some things. We invested in tourism. It's doing really well. We put $640 million in our ports. That's added 120,000 jobs. And we've gone after, we've tried to recruit companies. And we've added in 3.5 years 620,000 jobs. Just last month, 37,000. So lower taxes, less regulation, lowering tuition cost. We're all doing it. We have different issues. Our states have different opportunities, but we're all doing it. It actually works really well, and it's worked really well in our state.
Governor Haley, I know you've had really remarkable job growth, so I'm going to try to push you a little bit more to the question I was asking, which is a new type of messaging that, okay, now that we're coming out of the recession, how are we going to make sure every person in America has an economic opportunity? And that seems to be a new theme among, not a new theme, but a Jack Kemp revival theme amongst many of the Republicans.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having us here today. You know, I think first to go back to your what Paul Ryan is trying to do. I think I can say, and a lot of governors will tell you, I am incredibly frustrated with both Republicans and Democrats in D.C. They have done absolutely nothing. The reason you are seeing these governors really step up and do, we are all stepping up and doing things because we have to, because we can't wait on D.C., because we refuse to wait on D.C., and because we all ran wanting to make a point that if we can do it in our states, they can do it in D.C. I say that because at least Paul Ryan is doing something. You know, he's talking about solutions. He's saying, let's start look at the results that we want to go to. He's trying to move the ball. So I applaud him because in a time where governors feel like D.C. is doing nothing, we desperately need some assistance. Now, if you look in South Carolina or any of the states, our number one goal always has to be to find people jobs. If you find a person a job, you take care of a family. And that's how we take care of our families. But if you go back to how do we really move the needle? In South Carolina, we're very proud. In 2011, unemployment got up to as high as 11.1%. Today, it's 5.3%. We now have more people working in South Carolina than ever in the history of the state. But not only did we recruit and bring jobs in, we went a step further. We said, how can we get creative with government? So we looked at the fact that everybody was very negative about welfare. Why am I paying for that person on the couch? Why aren't they doing for themselves? What are you going to do to make them go back to work? So we changed things. DC basically says when somebody comes into your welfare office, check the boxes and hand them a check. In South Carolina, we changed it that when someone comes into the welfare office, we check the boxes and we say, what do you do? What are you good at? What's your skill set? We did not hire one extra person. We just changed the way we did it. And by doing that, by asking those extra questions, by doing that a little bit of extra work, we have taken over 20,000 people off of welfare and put them into a job.
Governor Christie? First off, I agree with most of everything that was said by my four colleagues, so I'm not going to repeat it. I'll go into one part of what Paul talked about today that we're already doing in New Jersey that I think is incredibly important for us as a party and a country. We have too many people sitting in state prisons across this country for nonviolent, petty drug offenses. And the fact is that what we do is we put them in prison. They're addicted, most of them. We don't give them any kind of significant treatment, long-range treatment, and then we release them. And then we wonder why they go back and commit more crimes to support their habit. This is an illness, it's a disease, and we need to stop stigmatizing it and deal with it. And so what we're doing in New Jersey is for folks who are first-time offenders, nonviolent drug offenders, not dealers, but people who are holding and using. Instead of going to prison, they're going to 1 year mandatory inpatient drug treatment. Now, this helps in two ways. First, obviously, you get the chance to give someone the tools to deal with their disease and to be able to come out and be productive citizens again, to be able to get a job, pay taxes, support their family, both financially but also emotionally. we get better fathers and mothers and sons and daughters and brothers and sisters. But secondly, if you're just an accountant and you only care about the money, in New Jersey it costs us $49,000 a year to house these folks in state prison. Inpatient drug treatment in New Jersey costs $24,000 a year. So if all you're worried about is the money, we're halving the amount of cost, but what you're getting on the back end is something that's going to be much more valuable. And I'm making the argument to my party, I'm pro-life. And if you're pro-life, you have to be pro-life when they get out of the womb also. And that gets messy sometimes, you know? It gets messy because they don't create any trouble in the womb. But when they get out of the womb, lots of tough things can happen. Lots of tough things can happen.
You want to say that?
Spoken like a true man.
Lots of bad things can happen.
We have 5 children.
And the fact is that if you're pro-life, then you've got to be pro-life for the person who's sitting at the bottom of a jail cell, drug addicted, feeling like their life is over. And it isn't about just warehousing that person. And you want to talk about economic opportunity? Well, you get someone off of drugs and back into a productive life, that not only helps society and our economy financially, but it also makes us feel better about who we are. And so for me in New Jersey, after having been the U.S. attorney for 7 years, I felt like I was uniquely in a position to do this because no one's going to call me soft on crime after doing that for 7 years. And the fact is, this isn't soft on crime, it's smart. And so I loved seeing that piece of recognition in what Paul talked about today, because we as a party should be the party that's talking about that. If we are a party that believes that every life is precious and no one should be deprived of a second chance, well, then we need to get on that issue.
Let me drill down more on that with everybody, because it's incredibly interesting to me watching this big social change happen from the old 3 strikes and you're outlaw type of things. It's your senator and our Aspen Institute Crown Fellow and your friend Cory Booker who reached across the aisle with a bill with Rand Paul on incarceration. Paul Ryan puts it in. Is this something that you can see, and I'd like all of you to answer, would be a bipartisan new trend we could have in this country?
You know, when I was still in the Congress, we did the Second Chance Act, and the whole thing was trying to target what we could do to get our recidivism rates cut in half by doing these smart things and working with people more while they're in jail. Because a lot of them, 2/3 of ours that are in prison, they're either addiction or it's a mental illness or both. And so we've been moving these more in that area. And then the second thing we did, and didn't cost hardly anything, is we're targeting getting somebody as a mentor for every prisoner that comes out of prison in the state of Kansas. We get about 6,000 out a year. We're 4,000 people now. And we start it while they're still in jail. And our recidivism rate has gone in half with the people we're mentoring. Now, they didn't soft on crime, but it's a beautiful relational thing that's taking place. And this, I think, is an area where we can do a lot more and smarter things, particularly working mental health issues around issues of corrections while we've got folks in the system.
And one thing we did, we have a new program for juvenile justice. And what we've done is a 12-year-old gets stopped. Historically, if a 12-year-old gets stopped 2 o'clock in the morning, they would be told they have to show up to a police department in a couple days. When they don't show up, somebody shows up at their school, and then people think they're a criminal. So we changed all that. You take a 12-year-old, they get stopped, it's a civil citation, no police officer is going to arrest them for not showing up, and we throw all the services at them. Is there a homeless issue? Is there a drug issue? Is there an alcohol issue? Is there a mental illness issue? And in 3 years, as we've developed that around the state, we've seen an over 40% drop in the number of 18-year-olds that are going to prison. And a city that you would be shocked that has one of the lowest crime rates now is Miami. And this was already implemented in Miami, so I hired the individual that was running in Miami, and she's had a dramatic impact. And at the prison level, we're already seeing we have the lowest recidivism, I think, in the history of the state now. And it's just simple things like that.
Let me move on to education reform, and we'll go this way, starting with Governor Christie, which is, what have you learned from Newark, in which you've had a major, once again working with Cory Booker, change in education, a great contract with the teachers that did tenure, allowed more charters, but then an enormous political pushback?
Well, listen, Newark is one of those places where, we're spending, state controls the school district, and we provide about 95% of the funding to the Newark School District, and we're paying $24,500 per pupil per year.
That is like twice the national average,
Yeah.
I guess?
And with that, 2 years ago, the graduation rate in Newark was 23%. So it seems to me that the debate that is driven by the teachers union around the country, that if you just threw more money at it, it would get better. Newark is a really good example. By the way, Newark is not the school district in the state where we spend the most money. Asbury Park, New Jersey, famous from Mr. Springsteen, we are right now who graduated from Asbury Park High School can't read at the 8th grade level. So in Newark, what we said to the teachers union was Newark's population continues to diminish, yet they have a school system that's designed for and staffed at the level that they were at 20 years ago. So what we did with philanthropic help, Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla made a $100 million challenge grant to Newark to allow us to innovate. We raised another $100 million from philanthropic sources to match that. But just to put that in context, everyone's like, wow, $200 million. The annual budget at the Newark school system is $1 billion, annual. So the fact is...
So what did you do with the money? Was that
what we did with the $200 million, which I think is the first time they voluntarily agreed to this in the country, to eliminating completely a non-merit pay system. It is now a completely merit pay system going forward in Newark, and we use
based on assessment tests, partly?
Based on the teacher tenure reform that we had achieved the year before we negotiated the contract, which now all teachers are evaluated in New Jersey, and about 30% of their evaluation is based upon test scores. The rest based upon other subjective and objective measures. And so that's what the merit pay is based upon. The Zuckerberg money is also being used to buy some teachers out. Because one thing we didn't get accomplished in tenure reform was to eliminate LIFO, was to eliminate last in, first out. And so as a result, there's some teachers we want to get rid of, and a lot of our younger teachers are not the ones that we want to get rid of. So Mark has stepped forward and allowed some of that money to be used to buy some of those ineffective teachers out, to get them out of the system. And there's been a lot of attention on Newark lately, and all I can say is this: we have made, in the last 2 years, some really significant progress because of these changes. And you're seeing increases in graduation rates. You're seeing greater enrollment in pre-K programs than ever before. And the system is beginning to change. Quickly, the political reaction to that, though, is after Cory Booker leaves to go to the United States Senate, there's a new election for a new mayor of Newark. That mayor, who was just elected, is the former principal at Central High School in Newark.
The worst performing, almost.
The worst performing high school in Newark. And to say that he's opposed to these reforms would be an understatement. If you looked at his campaign in Newark, it was as if he was running against me, not against Shavar Jeffries, who was his opponent. And in the end, though, the good news is this. He came in to talk to me about his agenda and said he wanted to speak to me about the educational system in Newark. And I said to him, listen, I'll listen to whatever you have to say, but the state runs the school system, I'm the decider, and you have nothing to do with it.
And you reappointed.
And the second person he was running against, beside me, other than Shavar Jeffries, was Cammie Anderson, who was the state-appointed superintendent of schools there. Her contract was expiring on June 30th of this year. He was being sworn in on July 1st. So on June 30th, I extended her contract 3 years.
Just to follow up on something Chris said, you've asked me about this a couple of years ago on this panel about, a lot of people think what we did in Wisconsin was about unions. It really was about education reform, as well as reforming things for taxpayers. And I'll give you a good example of what Chris was just talking about. In fact, in our state, I think it's probably the most consequential education reform in the last 25 years. And we've got statewide school choice we've got charter schools. But what we did was empowered our traditional public schools to do what our successful charter and choice schools were doing. Great example of what you just mentioned. 4 years ago, spring of 2010, before I'm governor, young woman by the name of Megan Sampson, first-year English teacher, in Milwaukee Public Schools, MPS, like a lot of our urban school districts like Newark and others, terribly in need of great teachers. This young woman, English teacher, gets named the outstanding teacher of the entire state for that year. Best of the best, young teacher in Milwaukee, exactly who you want. About 2 weeks later, she gets notice she's being laid off. Why? Because even before I came in and before Republicans took over the legislature, Democrats in our state cut public education, but they didn't give them any resources. So what do they do when they cut resources? They lay teachers off. And under the old collective bargaining contract, how do they lay teachers off? Last in, first out. Last hired, first fired. Well, the irony, a lot of people don't know this, it wasn't just about taking on unions and getting pension and health care contributions. In the case of Megan Sampson, it was about ensuring that great teachers like her are the last ones you want to lay off. They're the last ones you want to fire. And the ones that have been there 25 or 30 years, who I say sometimes are the one, not all of them in that category, because a lot of them are good, have been there that long too, but the ones who've been there 25 years and retired about 5 years ago, they just haven't left the building, are exactly the ones that need to leave. And that's about empowering us to make sure that every kid in every district in every part of this country gets a great education.
But let me push back on you just a little, which is there were 10% cuts, wasn't that right, for 2010, 2011, 2012 under you?
No, in the cuts before.
I know, but when it went first year in your term?
We did, absolutely. In fact, and I'll give you one more example. By empowering our local school districts and our local governments, I was a local official before that, by about half of our budget is aid to local governments, the state aid to schools and to counties and towns and villages and that. By empowering them to make things up with not only pension and health care contributions, of what most school districts, school employees in our state paid zero for the health care. Zero. Most paid nothing. Now they're paying a fraction of what their neighbors do in the private sector. They're able to balance the budget. The nonpartisan Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance says they were able to make up for any of the reductions in state aid, and they made them up through other areas like that. The Wisconsin, the WA Trust, which is the teachers union health insurance company, was out there with almost every contract in our state saying they had to buy that through their contract from that entity for their health insurance. Once our reforms went in, it was gone, saved tens of millions of dollars, money that went right back in the classroom. And the results, 4 years later, every year graduation rates are up, third grade reading scores are up. Wisconsin's got the second best ACT scores in the country. So for all the doom and gloomers who said if you take the power away and you put it in the hands of the taxpayers instead of the teachers union, the facts just don't bear that out. Actually, education is better today because the taxpayers and the people they duly elect are now back in charge.
Governor Scott, one of the great education reform governors was one of your predecessors, Jeb Bush. Very strongly did all the things we're talking about, but he strongly feels that you just can't continue it unless you have some sense of standards that you can measure and that are somewhat common. I know now that Common Core standards has become like an evil word, but how do we reform that so that we still have some standards? We can know if kids are progressing, if teachers are performing, and how the kids in Florida are doing against the kids in Louisiana.
Well, what we've done is my first year in office, we got rid of tenure. We stopped that. We also were stuck with the last governor cutting education funding the years he was there. But we started, measuring our teachers, putting out a lot of measurement of all of our schools. We expanded charter schools. We have a corporate scholarship program that can help low-income students. We've expanded opportunities for developmentally disabled students, and we've done all that. And we have Florida standards. We have very high standards, and the results, when you look at it, we all see these national results. I think Education Week we're number 6. Our fourth graders are in the top, I think, 5 in the world in reading. The Hispanic students' highest graduation rates in the United States. Last year we had the highest student achievement gains for African American students. The National Council for Teacher Equality, I think 2 years in a row, said we have the most effective teachers. So it's all tied to measurement. Now we think our standards are the right standards. Every one of our states is a little bit different. The expectations of our parents are different. And that's why we've gone with our own standards.
But do you think the solution to what may not be, what may be a somewhat manufactured debate, is instead of having core standards for the whole country, have high standards in each state, but have them interoperable and comparable? Is that what you're saying?
Well, what we have is we have our own standards, but we all get measured. I mean, there's all these measurement systems, so we still have the opportunity to measure. I mean, there's surveys on our 4th and 8th graders. There's surveys on reading levels, things like that. Graduation rates. Our graduation rates are up the last 3 years. So our standards have worked for us, but I think every state's probably a little bit different.
Governor Haley, you were leaning forward.
I think that what we need to remember is everybody's talking about education like it's this rocket science, and it's not. I went to school in a brick block, and I turned out just fine. So when you look at the fact, it's all about going back to the basics. Common Core, the reason Common Core was what we saw was a problem in South Carolina. We rolled back Common Core and do not have it. The reason we didn't was because whether it's healthcare, whether it's regulations, whether it's education, everything should be state-run. You know, in South Carolina, we build planes, we build cars, we build tires. We're heavy manufacturing. We're focused in on STEM. We're focused in on those standards. It's what South Carolina kids need to be able to get those South Carolina jobs.
Okay, but let me question you. You got a wonderful tire factory that just moved in,
I have
right?
4.
I know, but a new one I just read the new one just came in, right? And they're competing against those states. The Chamber of Commerce, the United States says when those companies decide, they want to know the education standards in each state. Don't we have to have some way to have high standards so that companies and parents can measure state by state by state?
If we did not have high standards in South Carolina, we would not be building Boeing airplanes. If we did not have high standards in South Carolina, we would not be the largest BMW producing plant in the world. If we did not have high standards in South Carolina, we would not have Bridgestone, Michelin, Continental, and now GT Tire. We are invested in our kids. We're invested in making sure it's our kids that get those jobs. At what point are the national DC people best suited to tell us what we need in South Carolina when we're recruiting these jobs every day? Instead of going with federal people and what they think, we're talking to our companies. We're talking to Boeing. We're talking to BMW. We're talking to them and we're saying, what kind of workers do you need? And we're doing apprenticeships and we're working with our technical colleges to make sure that we are training them, getting them ready for those jobs and putting them in. If you look at schools, and I would bet that every one of us are going through that, schools don't teach cursive anymore. My son, my daughter can write cursive. I went to go have my son sign his name. He couldn't sign his name. At what point do you not have basic multiplication tables and cursive writing and all those things that made us who we are? We still need to just be back at the basics again. Now, and I do want to say this. With the new highly technical jobs, we want highly technical educated kids. But that doesn't mean we have to come up with a whole new way to teach kids. All it means is you're teaching to the jobs that you want them to get. That means more science, more math. That means making sure that we have the right technical schools that are up to date on training. That's what we need to do to really lift up our country in every state, but make sure it's state-run. We know what we need for our kids. We need to be the ones deciding that.
Well, you will have the best cursive penmanship in the nation, I hope. To defend the core standards, multiplication tables are very much in there. So we all need to know how to do multiplication, I agree. Let me turn to economic tax cuts, things like tax cuts and tax development. You started it, Governor Brownback, talking about it. But you've had you had the $300 million shortfall. What have you learned from your tax cut that you did, and what type of things do you need to revise?
Well, Walter, I beg to differ a little bit on the factual. We just ended our fiscal year, reported it out 2 weeks ago on Friday. We had $434 million cash on hand. The summer before I took office in 2010, they ended the books in the state of Kansas. They had $876.05 in the state bank account.
Well, I'm sorry. Tell me what that $300 million number kicking around.
That was off of projection, but we ended with $434 million cash on hand, off of building from less than $1,000 cash on hand. Now, I give it to the prior administration. They had great accountants to get that close on a $14 billion budget. You know, I mean, really, you got to give it to them. That's just really pretty impressive. But what we did is we cut taxes to be able to put that back in the private sector so it creates jobs and opportunities. And we really targeted small business with that. We said, let's take that tax on small business, LLC and sub-S pass-through, and go to zero. And you do the economic modeling on it, and it just shoots up. Great story on this. My middle daughter got married about 4 months ago. We're building a little tent, and they got some lumber coming from Menards. Give them a pitch if they're here. And this guy that's delivering is a contractor, and he drops the lumber, and he's got 3 more jobs, and he drops the lumber, and he looks at me and says, hey, you're the governor, right? Yeah. Hey, thanks for that tax thing. That was good. I own this truck here, and that's really helped me out. I'm an independent contractor, and this is what I do. I say, oh, great. What are you going to do with the money? Well, I'm looking at this fall, buying another truck and hiring another guy to put in that truck so that we can grow our business. And I said, perfect answer. That's the exact right answer. You got it right. Because 3/4 of Kansans work for themselves or for somebody with 10 or fewer employees. America is moved by small business. So if you want more of it, take the tax off of it.
But
And that's the
hasn't
way to
job
grow.
growth in Kansas lagged a bit around the region?
Historically, and now we are really moving it forward on private sector job growth, where the left and the vast left-wing conspiracy has really been looking at this, saying, well, you're not growing as fast. We are not growing public sector jobs. We're down 3,000 public sector employees in the state of Kansas. Now, we're up on teachers, but we're down 3,000 at the state level, and we got a record employment in the state, and we're changing our percentage, growing the private sector and not the public sector. And that's the one, the public sector cannot long be more prosperous than the private sector. The private sector is the one that's got to be churning, and that's why I'm a pro-growth Republican. That's how you really build, is getting that growth taking place.
Do you feel there's going to have to be any modification?
I don't see it. We've got the growth happening. Kansas City is a great example to look at, actually. It's one of the most unusual places in the country. About 55% of the employment's on the Missouri side, 45% on the Kansas side. We are growing on the Kansas side 3 times faster in private sector jobs than on the Missouri side. This is the same city. What's the difference here? We've got a great educational system, and you got 0 taxes on small business pass-through. You got growth happening, and we're going to continue to really press that growth on forward, and that's the key. It's growth. That's 3/4 of the equation is growing.
Governor Walker, you also some people have been pushing back that your job growth is a little bit lower than the regional or national average. Why? What are you doing about that?
Well, for us, it's similar to what Sam mentioned. Us in Indiana have the 2 largest portions of our economies dependent on manufacturing. So we have to move it from the past century into the first. We're doing that with advanced manufacturing, certainly with agriculture, but other technologies. But it is an interesting contrast. You mentioned that the 2 Kansas cities, it's similar to the 2 states, the tale of 2 states, Wisconsin and Illinois. Wisconsin, over the last 3 years, has reduced the tax burden by about $2 billion. Income taxes are down, employer taxes are down. Property taxes this December will actually be lower, not only than they were last year, they'll be lower than when I started in December of 2010. In contrast, Illinois has raised taxes on individuals 67% and on businesses 46%. Their unemployment rate's almost 2 points higher, and they're in a death spiral. That's what CEO Magazine called them, in a death spiral. They're ranked 48th in the country for best places to do business. We went up from 41 4 years ago to number 14 in the country, and it's because we put that focus in on there. Now, it's interesting, and you're going to hear it from each of us, because I think there's a reason. Data doesn't lie. If you look at every month at the average unemployment rate in states led by Republican governors versus those led by Democrat governors, the average is about, on almost every month, Phil knows because he keeps track of this with me as well, it's almost 1 point lower in states led by Republicans. Oh, wait a minute. You got Texas in there, you got the coast. Yeah, but you got Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio and all these states that were a train wreck 4 years ago when the recession hit. Why? Because we're enacting pro-growth policies that are putting more money back in the hands of employers and consumers to put people to work. We see all the time, I just broke ground for Kennel Manufacturing from Lake County, just north of Chicago, that broke ground, 621 new jobs out there. Why? Because they like the business climate and they know it's going to be more affordable for them to add jobs in Wisconsin as opposed to the tax climate in Illinois.
Governor Scott, yeah, and if you would also, one of your mantras has been jobs for the next generation. So explain how you're doing that.
Sure. So here, I'll tell you, I believe in taxes. First off, I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. My family didn't have much money, so they didn't worry about taxes much. But in Kansas City, they have a city income tax also. Everybody that made money moved to Shawnee Mission, Kansas. They didn't stay in Missouri. But I walked into this. The prior governor, who's probably my likely opponent, he raised taxes. He borrowed $8.7 billion in the 4 years he was governor, and he lost 832,000 jobs. And he left me with a $3.6 billion budget deficit. We've cut taxes every year. We've paid off $7.1 billion worth of debt, and we've added 620,000 jobs. And this year I put $3 billion away in a rainy day fund. And I walked in with it. He took unemployment from 3.5 in 4 years to 11.1, and we've taken it from 11.1 to 6.2. And our jobs, people are moving back to our state. In those 4 years, more people left the state of Florida than moved in. So tax cuts work. Now, we're doing something very similar to Governor Haley. We're very focused on where the next jobs. The jobs are going to be technology. It's science, engineering, technology, and math. And so whether it's making sure that we have, as an example, performance funding for our universities tied to basically three things. What's it cost for a degree? Do you get a job? How much money do you make? We're incentivizing our universities to have more STEM degrees and focus where all the jobs are. And it's clearly working in our state. We're competing for all these manufacturing jobs, and we're actually competing now. Before South Carolina was winning all the time, so we're absolutely competing. But we're getting, like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, AT&T, Verizon, a lot of these companies that historically would not have come to Florida and expanded are now coming there.
Let me change, if I may, to healthcare, and I'll start with you again because you ran an urgent care facility. With the rulings that are split in the courts of appeals, it may come down to the fact that the Affordable Care Act subsidies will only be available to states that have insurance exchanges. None of your states have insurance exchanges, is that right? Are there any of you that might think of going to, I guess not, given the applause, but if you have an insurance exchange, can you get the subsidies? Might you think of going to an insurance exchange program?
Well, I spent most of my career in healthcare. I built a large hospital company. I've done a lot of different things. Obamacare is a disaster. It needs to be repealed. In our state, here's what it's done. The president promised people wouldn't lose their plans. They're losing them. He promised you wouldn't lose your doctor. They're losing them. Medicare Advantage is being rated $700+ billion. You talk to Medicare recipients in our state, they're losing their doctors. Their plans are changing. Their premiums are going up. So it's horrible, and it's making our companies way less competitive. We compete globally. We compete with anybody in South and Central America. We're competing with them all the time, and so we're not doing an exchange.
Anybody change? Then let me move on to the border crisis and go to you, Governor Haley. I'm sorry.
Just one quick thing on that. Just to echo that, the interesting thing is that I know all of us talk to employers all the time. Every week I'm going to be out with 2 employers tomorrow after we get back. One of the single most significant things for job growth we were just talking about a moment isn't just tax relief and things we talked about, it's certainty. Employers, big or small alike, crave certainty. Not only is this bad policy, as we see with these 2 conflicting court decisions, it shows maybe people should have actually read what was in the bill before they passed it, because it's full with all sorts of contradictions. But the worst part is it's the uncertainty of this federal administration continuing to change it and move the ball and move around, which I hear, I was talking about this at breakfast with Chris, I hear from employers who I've never heard a political word before. So it's not just people who are ideologically opposed to it. I hear from people who have never, ever spoken out politically, who say they're scared to death about the uncertainty of the Affordable Care Act, or as we call it, Obamacare, and they're worried about the future, because in our state, I would imagine similar with the other governors, our premium increases they're looking at in the future are 25 to 30% at the low ball, as high as 50 to 60%. That's for the so-called Affordable Care Act. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound affordable, and that's risking jobs all across each one of our states and across America.
Governor Haley, let me turn to you because we talked about it earlier, the border crisis, children on the border. Jeh Johnson, the Secretary of Homeland Security, was here at lunch today talking, and he said he had talked to you, had good conversations, and that this is a difficult humanitarian problem, but we have to all figure out a way to solve it. It's going to take some money, he said, but he told a pretty tear-jerking tale, because he went right down to the border when this happened, and it was Mother's Day, and he talked to a 12-year-old girl and said, "Are you here with your mother?" And she said, "No, my mother's dead, but I know my dad's in the United States, and I want to go find him." And so if this were happening on the border of Bangladesh, we'd be sending in humanitarian relief. What should we be doing? And you had a good conversation, I think, with Secretary Jeh Johnson when you talked to him. What's your thought on this?
Well, I did have a conversation with Secretary Johnson, because what all the governors are facing now is we're seeing on TV where you're seeing buses and you're seeing shelters, but you don't know what it means in your state because the feds have not given that to the governors. And so what I told him was, look, you've got these undocumented children. You haven't told any of the governors anything. We don't know if we're getting them. We don't know where they're going. We don't know what they're going to. And then you're telling us it doesn't cost us anything. And he said, well, it doesn't cost you anything. I said, but you want me to educate them, right? And you want me to pay their health care, right? It does cost us something. So what I will tell you is we all need to remember, we live in an amazing country. And the reason this country is great is because of the legal immigrants we have here. It is the fabric of America. It's what makes us great. But we are a country of laws. When you give up really taking care of those laws, you lose everything this country was made of. They have got to secure the border. It is that important. It is that serious. What they are saying right now is they're saying these children are coming to the border. Homeland Security is taking them. The kids have a phone number in their pocket or there's something stitched on the back of their pants. And they're trying to find out where these kids go. And they're putting them with some sort of family member or friend. But this undocumented child is going with this undocumented person in my state that you tell me you can't find. This is a problem. We do care about these children. We do want them to be safe, but we also have our own children to take care of. We've got our foster children in every one of our states, and we are trying to balance a budget. And because they won't do the one basic thing of securing our border, we are now taking on additional children that it's just wrong. It's wrong. And when we ask who these children are or where they are, Secretary Johnson said, we can't tell you because of privacy issues.
Listen, this is, first off, I know Secretary Johnson. Personally, he is a good person. I wish that the President of the United States would have gone to the border. At least the Secretary did, to be able to talk about that. And the President didn't find the time to be able to go to the border, even though it's such a crisis. And that's just an indication of his unwillingness to lead. He wants us all to step up to the plate, all right? And the President's not there. And the crazy thing about what they're doing, Scott and I were in this meeting with the Secretary of HHS at the National Governors Meeting, and she started to describe how they were dealing in a humanitarian way with this. And she was saying, well, these children have 90 or 95%, she said, have a contact in the U.S. That is willing to take them. And she said their main job of the guardian is to protect the safety and welfare of the child and to ensure their appearance at their immigration hearing. So I then asked, I said, so you're asking the guardian whether they're documented, correct? And she said, no. So I said, so let me understand, one of the two main jobs of this guardian is to make sure that this child goes to their immigration hearing, yet you're giving them potentially, and almost probably, to people who are not documented. So the undocumented people who haven't got through the immigration system are going to be the ones who are going to go to the immigration office and take these children to the immigration office. It is completely illogical, and it's why folks get so frustrated with government. Nikki's right. We have to secure the border. But how about before we even talk about that, to deal with the current crisis, I think we all feel a great sense of sympathy for these children. But can we use some plain common sense? You don't need a Harvard degree to figure out that if you're going to try to ensure that someone goes to their immigration hearing, that you might want to send them to someone who actually has complied with the immigration laws.
Rutgers degree. We're going to try to
Whatever.
keep the state of New Jersey.
Well,
Let me go to the audience.
Yeah,
Okay, one
real
more.
quick comment on this. This is dangerous for the kids. There are kids dying in this process of moving up here, and our youngest son's from Guatemala. I mean, this is really, when you create this expectation that if you get across the border, you're good, this is going to make it, and you start this exodus that's happening, this is really dangerous for them. That's why you got to secure this border. And the first thing the president has to do is say very clearly, this border is secure, and we're going to make sure it happens. So
You have
stop.
to change the
so you
2008 law that gave that expectation?
I think you have to say that with clarity right now before even you change the law, that this is the way we're going to handle this, because otherwise you continue to create that draw that's
For
here
better
that's
or
very
worse,
dangerous.
Secretary Johnson agreed with you and said it over and over again today that, don't have that expectation. But you're right, it's a crisis because of it. I can't see much. I see one hand that will really cause our mic runners a problem because you're in the exact middle of the audience, but that's good. If somebody steals the mic before it gets to you, that's the way it works. And that's shout it out. I'll repeat. Okay.
Thank you very much for calling on me. My name is Ralph Doherty, and I'm from the state of Texas, and we have some knowledge of the problem that Governor Haley's talking about. Let me say this. I am pleased to hear the tenor, the tone, and the content of every governor that I'm listening to tonight. Frankly, I wasn't sure I'd feel that way an hour ago. I have a simple question. I don't think the message that you've delivered to this audience in the last hour goes any further than this front door. I'm interested in how you feel we should take the word that you've delivered tonight, the tenor, the tone, and the content, and get it out in America so people hear what you're concerned about.
It's
Thank
a
you very
jump
much.
ball. One governor gets to pick it up. Who leans forward first? Nikki. I'm sorry, Governor Haley.
Let's do it, Nikki. That's because you didn't want to take it. No, I'm just kidding. What I'll tell you is every one of these governors, and there's a lot of other really great governors in the room, truly, we are fighting this every single day. The hardest part of our job is Washington, D.C., because every time we move the ball, they push us back again. What we're going to continue to do is fight. What we're going to continue to do is yell. And the media can ignore it all they want. We're just going to get louder. But our job is results. It's not what we say, it's what we do. And you're seeing us do that with results every single day. So no matter what Washington throws at us, our job is to educate, be loud about the way we do it, and do something about it. And that's what we'll continue to try and do. It's a tough thing, but we're going to continue to be loud and continue to fight.
I think the other way to think about it is it's not just our job. It's your job. This is your country. And you have to be more active. You have to talk to everybody that you come in contact with. And you have to say, this is our country. We have beliefs about where this country ought to go, because the truth is, by ourselves, we can't do it. If you're not willing to get involved in getting the message out, we won't turn this country around. And it's not just raising money. It's talking to people, go vote, get involved in races, all these things.
Did you want to, Governor? Okay, great.
Really shy, sorry.
All right, way back there. Yeah. All right. I'll get up front too, sorry.
Hi, I'm Paul Pariser, a New Yorker, and I admire Mr. Christie's actions across the river often. I have a tough question. It's more related to the national political scene than the state scene. I voted Republican on most of the presidential races since I've graduated college, and I feel over the last many years that we've been abandoned. I've been abandoned. The social issues of the Republican Party that get pounded on in the debates just are casting a dark eye on people like me who are a little more open and flexible to gays, to women and minorities. I'd just like to get your sense of how we can turn this around a little bit.
Governor Christie.
I'm trying to get over my shyness, but I'll see what I can do. Listen, this is something that I hear all the time from folks like you who come from my part of the country or from the West Coast. They say, I'm a Republican, but I'm tired of Republicans getting pounded on these social issues. Well, the fact is, it's about what this gentleman just said, I think. It's about the tenor and tone of how you present yourself in these issues. And the fact is that, as I said earlier, I'm pro-life, and I'm the first pro-life governor that's been elected in New Jersey since Roe versus Wade. And everybody told me before I ran that I had to change my position because I could never win. Well, the fact is that I don't think we're getting pounded because of the social issues. I think we're getting pounded because of the way we present ourselves. And you know, people want folks who are authentic and who believe what they say is true, but also are willing to be tolerant and listen to others' points of view. And you know, you'll get some folks who'll say that, you know, that means, you know, if you're willing to listen, that somehow you're weakened on your own principles. It's absolutely garbage. I mean, the fact is, I have plenty of folks in my state who vote for me, who have significantly different opinions than mine on some of those issues. And the fact is, though, I have a lot of them who say to me, I disagree with you on this one, but I like you on a bunch of other stuff, so I'm going to vote for you. The reason for that is because they think I'm listening to them, and they're then listening to me. And they know that what I say, I believe in my heart. It's not something that I got from a focus group. It's not something that I got from a political consultant. It's not something that, you know, I came up with as a way to try to avoid answering your question. So in an attempt to not avoid to answer your question, I just absolutely don't believe that the premise is true. And I think we've lost for a whole bunch of reasons over the last 2 cycles nationally. And I think that the social issue matrix is an absolutely minor one. You'll say, some folks will say, well, we don't win the women's vote because of that. Well, I don't know. I got 56% of the women's vote for re-election in 2013, and I didn't change any of my positions in iota. Did they forget? No. They made a holistic evaluation because they felt like that's the way I was listening and treating them as well. That's the way people are supposed to lead, I think.
Second row there, yeah.
Hello, I'm Marilyn Behrens from Miami Beach, Florida. So my question is primarily for Governor Scott. Your Democratic opponent and former governor of the state of Florida has come out against the Cuban embargo. And I know there are large populations of Cubans in other states as well, New Jersey, South Carolina. I'd like to know your position on the Cuban embargo and what would it take to drop the Cuban embargo, in your opinion?
Well, let's remember what we have here. We have a deranged dictator that just in the last few days said that the Ukrainian government is the one that shot down that plane. All right? So my opponent wants to take a trip to Cuba and start doing work with Cuba when that same individual says those things, and also is responsible for individuals being killed in Venezuela, peaceful protesters being killed in Venezuela. So I agree with the ladies in white that are in Cuba that said the embargo needs to continue. I agree with there's an individual down there, a big leader, Anendez, that says we ought to have the embargo because there's no political freedom there. There's no business freedom. There's no free market. There's no religious freedom. There's none of that's down there. I'm not going to go suggest that business people in Florida start doing business with somebody like that.
Stipulating all that certainly he's a deranged dictator. Is there anybody on the panel who feels the embargo hasn't been effective and is not the best way to continue? All right, next question. Way in the back there. Just wanted to give somebody a chance.
Hi, my name is Ryan Shea, and I live in Aspen, Colorado. And my question is referring to Obamacare. Now, you said Obamacare needs to be repealed, and I agree Obamacare is a complete disaster. But when FDR instituted Social Security, it was a disaster until it started to grow. So my question is, do you believe that it has to be repealed? Or do you think it can be reformed and changed into making it a working and successful program?
And since I kind of know what some of the answers may be, let me also extend it, which is, what would you replace it with? How would you make sure every person in America had a chance to get health care? Governor Scott.
Governor Scott Walker. This is Governor Scott.
Governor
See, that's what's
Walker.
confusing next to two of us. Scott.
I'm going to separate
Walker,
y'all
Scott,
next time.
Walker. That's right. They got to go back and forth. Actually, you had this once on CNBC where I was on after Rick, and the producer didn't change it so it said Governor Rick Scott Walker.
I'm going to start using that,
That's right.
even though I know
It's
you all
It's even
apart.
more confusing. Rick and I once did a panel with Governor Rick Perry, so it was Rick Scott, Scott Rick, Rick Scott. It was very, very confusing. So,
And you all
That's right, you're the
discovered the
combo.
South
You're the
Pole
ce-
by doing it,
that's
right?
right. Your centerpiece. Now, what was that question? No. Clearly, we got to repeal it because I mean this court decision this week's yet another example. This is so screwed up. Even the courts don't even know what to make of all this. It is completely messed up. It's causing, as I mentioned before, tremendous uncertainty. And to me, the whole premise is wrong. It might not be there yet today because it's really not working to its full intent that the president and Nancy Pelosi and others wanted out there. But eventually, the only way it could be affordable in the extreme, which is where they'd have to go if it was truly affordable, which it's not, is if you started to ration health care. If you had government determine who could and get and what degree they could get health care. My belief is if you're going to have it really to be something affordable, you got to go the opposite end of the spectrum and have something that's patient-centered, market-driven, that's based on transparency, having true access so that people have, you change the tax code so that you don't just get it through employer-based plans, you can get it through individualized plans, you can get it through health savings accounts and flex accounts and all those other things. And think of all the people, you probably have them silenced right now, but if you took out your cell phones and looked at it, you all probably know more about your cell phone coverage than you do about your health plan. I know because I've got a 20 and 19-year-old, and for years, when they were teenagers, I knew if I didn't get unlimited texting on my cell phone plan, I'd be in the poorhouse, right? As Americans, we know more about our cellular coverage than we know about our health plan. Why? Because the broken system, not just with Obamacare, the largely broken system before was replacing one form of bureaucracy with another. We need to have a transparent system where people know exactly what it takes to get something, where the patients are the ones in charge so that you and your family make those decisions. And that's something we can do by empowering those decisions, not just back to the states, but more importantly, back to the people.
Whenever we talk about healthcare reform, often we forget what the goal is. The goal is to have affordable healthcare that Americans have access to. That's the goal. When government healthcare has never worked anywhere in the world. Government healthcare says, I'm going to do everything. They promptly run out of money, and then they say, we're going to keep doing everything. We're just not going to pay people to do it. That's government healthcare. Look at the VA facilities. That's what's going on. So when you say patient-centered, what it actually is you decide what you want to buy. The government shouldn't be telling you what insurance to buy. You ought to be able to buy whatever insurance you want. You ought to be able to choose whatever doctor you want, whatever hospital you want. You ought to get the same tax breaks as employers, so you buy your own insurance policy and reward people for doing the right thing. Eat right, exercise. If you do that, the cost of healthcare will come down. More people could afford their insurance if they wanted to buy insurance. They might not want to buy insurance, just buy healthcare on their own. We don't make these decisions for food, other necessities, food, shelter, other things. If we do that, the cost of healthcare will come down. Way more people would have access to quality healthcare at a price they could afford.
Last question since, I'm sorry, back there, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be fair to all sections and all places, especially people I can't see.
Todd Martin from Dallas and Aspen, and my question is, are any of you introducing a new subject to public schools, preferably at a very early age, money, how to make it, how to get a job, how the American economy works, things like that?
Nikki, Governor Haley, I keep calling, sorry.
So I think, the one thing we found is we have to constantly watch where education is going. We do financial literacy in our schools. We make sure they know what it means to take out a house loan, how to write a check, what it means to have a bank account, what a student loan means and how you pay that back. So financial literacy is a part of what we do in South Carolina, and it should be, and we actually have online so that they're actually on the computer and they're seeing what it's like to look at loan papers and bank accounts and balance their account. The other side of it is, though, in South Carolina, what we did was we made sure that we were focused in really on the growth of a child. What are we doing to make sure from kindergarten all the way to their senior year in high school, they have everything they need? We just passed something that said if they can't read by the 3rd grade, they're held back. We're no longer going to pass kids that can't read. we're making sure that we're expanding options in charter schools so that they can do that. But those things like the basics, and those are the basics I was talking about. Financial literacy is one of those basics. So whether it's technology, whether it's reading, whether it's financial literacy, that's where we need to be with our kids.
I'm going to let all of you all in on the things we could do to make the next generation better educated like that, including pre-K if you want. Now, I'll start with Governor Brownback and move on down.
I think we got to get the basics right first. We got to make sure people can read. We had something like a 28% level of people in the students in the fourth grade couldn't read at basic reading levels. You got to get the basics right. And then I think we've got to do a lot more on technical education, moving on through the system. We've got to make sure that those kids, particularly when they're junior, senior years, often a lot of kids are not fully engaged in school at that point in time. Give them some technical school options. Give them some college options. We've got a school in Kansas that wants to make sure that every student when they graduate on graduation night either has 1 year of college under their belt or has a technical industry recognized certification. One or the other, or maybe both. Get them both. But let's get that in this system.
And what about at the very early end to make sure everybody starts off on the playing field, early childhood?
I think we've got to do more in that space. And what I think we really need to do is to emphasize reading in that space, not maybe do more on a broad set of topics, but let's make sure we get the basics through those.
Governor Walker.
You hear a common trend, reading for sure. We know statistically that if a kid's not reading at or above grade level by the time they go from 3rd to 4th grade, they're 4 times more likely not to graduate. You add poverty as a factor, they're 13 times more likely not to graduate. So you see all of us, I see a bunch of my colleagues here in the front are doing exactly the same things. It actually comes from Jeb's A+ plan for education, where we all said we got to capitalize on that. We're doing that. We actually start in preschool and in our particular state-funded daycare arrangements where we say you'll get reimbursed more if you can show that you're adding literacy and that the kids are well prepared by the time they get into kindergarten. We have assessments on the way, and so our teachers know right away with how well those kids are reading, because everything, and it makes sense, that statistic, when you think about it, as a kid, if you can think back to that, if you couldn't understand by the time you're going into 4th grade basic reading, it's that magical switch between learning to read and reading to learn. If you can't read, you can't get science and math and social studies and all those other things. That's where the dropout rate comes. So we do that. The other thing Sam talked about as well, we do technical college. We start as early as 6th grade now. We do academic and career plans where we start young people in middle school thinking about what are they good at, what are their skills at, and what skills or what jobs, careers are available in their area, because we want to make sure that we honor our sons and daughters who choose to be highly skilled welders or software designers or certified nursing assistants as much as we do those who choose to be doctors or lawyers, because we vitally need each of those professions. So we're starting that way, doing dual enrollment so they get training in junior high and high school, and then doing more in our technical colleges as well as our UW system.
Governor Scott.
The most important thing we can do is help their parents get a job. That has the biggest impact on every family in our country. My parents they really struggled, so it was the most important thing in my opinion. But then all the things that we're all doing, from early learning, from voluntary pre-K to making sure that whether you go to finish high school, you go to state college, or university, you're ready for a career.
You've already answered the question, Governor Haley, but I'm going to twist it a bit, because I was surprised you didn't say that at age 13, you were the accountant for your family's business and learning those type of financial skills. What about things like apprenticeships, after-school programs, summer jobs, like you had?
That's exactly right. You know, it goes to show that I didn't know until I got to college that wasn't normal. But, you know, what I can tell you is that you can learn at any age, and those work skills are very important. So what we're doing in South Carolina is we are starting with pre-K in the challenged areas. We've also done summer camps. So in those areas where we have a lot of latchkey kids, in those areas where we have a lot of poverty, we're making sure we do summer camps that teach math and reading, but also teach life skills and teach them so that they can come up, their parents know they're safe and they're better. But we have incorporated all of our companies into the way we educate our kids. So Boeing is involved, BMW is involved, we're doing apprenticeships, we're doing internships, we're doing camps. The companies want to be a part of our education in our states. And the more they're involved, the better it makes these kids ready for these jobs when the time comes.
Governor Christie, overcome your natural shyness and end up...
Well, listen, I agree with, again, being the last one here, it's agree with much of what they've said, and start with what Rick said. You know, the single most important influence on whether a child's going to learn or not is the home that they live in, and the stability and the emphasis on education that happens in that home. So working from there, what's the second most important factor? The second most important factor is a quality teacher in the front of the classroom. More than any of the other things, more than the technology they have and everything else. And the problem with everything that what my colleagues said up here today was, I agree with everything they want done. Who's going to do it? And the problem with our system today, and the reason I believe we're seeing declining achievement in reading and math across this country as compared to other parts of the industrialized world, is because we have a public education system in this country which has now been morphed into one that cares more about the comfort of adults than they care about the potential of children. And so everything that we're trying to do here is all absolutely laudatory and makes perfect sense. But if we are unwilling to take on the education establishment in this country, which is the most moneyed, influential establishment now in the public sector, if we are unwilling to take on tenure, if we are unwilling to take on last in, first out, if we are unwilling to take on the fact that in my state, unlike Scott's now because of the changes he made, in my state, our folks have to join the teachers union, whether you're a teacher or just a school employee. By state law, they have 200,000 members. They have $731 a year of mandatory dues. So the teachers union in my state collects $140 million a year in dues. They don't contribute an ounce to teacher salary, teacher pension, or teacher health care. It is a slush fund for political influence. And what they do is they go out and they buy elected officials with that who protect this system, which is producing declining results every year for America compared to other countries. And so, to me, all of this stuff is good, but if we don't have a quality teacher in the front of the classroom, no matter what we do as governors, it's going to fail. And if what we continue to allow is mediocrity or worse, lousy teaching, because we're unwilling to upset the apple cart, then we are not going to be the great power that we've been over our first 240 or so years here. And no one wants to talk about that because everybody loves their teacher. Everybody loves their teacher. I say to teachers in my state, I love teachers too. I just wish you had a union that was as good as you are. And the fact is, if we don't do that, then none of the other things we're talking about here tonight are going to happen, because none of these governors can be in the front of the classroom in every classroom in our state. We can't make that happen. So we better be willing to fight on that front. If we are unwilling to fight on that front, it is a war we're going to lose.
Governors, Scotts, welcome. Thank you. And since it's raining, everybody can stay and continue the conversation.